What's the story, everyone? Welcome back to GA Fan TV. I hope the form is good. I hope the form is well. So basically, social media has gone a little bit mad in the last couple of days, and obviously, all the talk is around Dublin football at the minute, especially after Glenn Ryan's post-match comments in the 2-point win from Dublin versus Kildare, and it definitely has opened up a can of worms. It definitely has opened up a lot of discussion, and we've seen all sorts of people give their own take on it. James Horan had his take on the Irish Examiner. We've seen ex-Dublin players come out and I suppose almost mock the likes of James Horan and everything else for some of their takes. And we've seen probably the majority of people within the GA community react to a lot of the news or a lot of the discussion on social media. And look, I have my own opinions on it. I understand I'm probably going to be in the minority ever so slightly. And I understand there's probably a lot of people watching this video that are going to disagree, probably get angry in the comments, and that is completely fair. Now, what I would say is for subscribers who watch this channel, for people who watch this channel, you'll know I'm not biased. I think I would like to imagine that people who watch this channel now understand that I'm not biased. I predicted Mayo to win the All-Ireland. I predicted Kerry to win the All-Ireland last year. I've openly said that this Dublin team is nowhere near All-Ireland level, despite the fact that plenty of other people still think Dublin are serious All-Ireland contenders. I do not believe that. I'm not biased by any stretch of the imagination. But look, I am a Dublin fan. I am a fan. And at the end of the day, you're always going to have a soft spot for your own county. And some of the talking points around this whole Dublin dominance debate and everything else, I think that there's some good arguments. I think there's some good points. And I think there are some points that are fair. But I also think there's a lot of hypocrisy involved. And I also think there is a lot of deflection away from serious matters or from more important matters, in my opinion, revolved around the likes of Kildare, revolved around the likes of Meath. So we're going to be reacting to, I suppose, the discussion, the talking points around Glenn Ryan's post-match comments. We'll give my take on it. And, was involved in obviously a couple of back and forths on Twitter regarding this scenario as well. So, let's discuss it a bit more sort of in person, shall we say. And I'd also be very curious as well to know your opinions on this as well in the comments down below. Obviously Dublin fans, what's your opinions on this? And for opposition fans, do you agree with Glenn Ryan's comments? Do you agree with the whole take that Dublin should be taken out of Croke Park? Do you agree with the fact that maybe Dublin should be split in two? Maybe Dublin should be taken out of the championship altogether. Like, I'm curious to know people's opinions in the comments down below. So we're going to react to Glenn Ryan's comments and we're going to discuss, should Dublin GA be kicked out of Croke Park? Should change now be needed for Dublin football? And is it about time that something was done about this? Let's go.
Frustrating from the point of view, like, I suppose everybody get out about the Croke Park thing and everything like that, but you come up here then you don't get a fair crack at a hit.
What do you mean?
Well, there's fellas walking up and down one side of the official, and nobody can know anything down the other end. Fellas standing in my so-called box, and there's my own officials being told to get out of it, and somebody from the other side, the sideline ball is not given. Fellas tripped up in front of the goals that wasn't given. And you can say it's sour grapes, but I know I'm reflecting the views of most people around, most teams around the country, that everything is laid out up here, number one, from a familiarity perspective, from a games perspective, and everything else seems to go the way as well.
Is it not also giving opportunities to Kildare players to play out in Croke Park today?
Sure, play anywhere. She wouldn't play anywhere when it's fair. And there wasn't anything glaring. Nothing glaring. I was not saying there was a calls went either way. When you look at stuff that goes on the sideline, the dressing rooms and all that, it's all wrapped up here.
Certainly an interesting opinion from Glenn Ryan. And look, what I will say straight away is that I do agree that it is unfair that Dublin do have the home advantage in Croke Park. I don't think it was ever intended to be that way. I don't think the plan was ever for Dublin to play their home games in Croke Park. And I don't think it ever meant to be a home ground. But I do think Glenn Ryan, look, he is right in the sense that, look, it is an advantage, and I don't think Dublin fans will even disagree with that. And I think ex-Dublin players and everyone else won't disagree with that. I think there is a lot of validity to what Glenn Ryan is saying there. I do think at the same time, though, like you look at it and think, like talking about refereeing decisions, talking about familiarity, talking about the fact that everything is laid out for Dublin to win. I'm not entirely sure I completely agree with that, to be perfectly honest, because referees, in my opinion, should be impartial, regardless of what ground it is, regardless of what team is home and away. You know what I mean? And obviously, look, Dublin, it's not officially a home ground. It's not sold as a home ground. I think every GA fan, every Dublin fan kind of knows that it kind of is a home ground. But look, referees are there to remain impartial. And I don't think they give certain decisions based off of, the crowd or the influence of the crowd. I also think as well, in terms of everything being laid out from a Dublin perspective, Kildare have come to Croke Park on numerous occasions, time and time again. They've probably played in Croke Park more times than any other county other than Dublin. And I just think with the whole Croke Park thing, with it being familiar and everything else, like Kildare should be familiar with it. They should be familiar with Croke Park. They've come to Croke Park, as much as anyone else has. Like when you look at it, Dublin, on average, in terms of games that they play in Croke Park in the past in the championship, we'd get 3 to 4 home matches, and then we'd get, let's say, 4 to 5 championship games, let's say. So we're playing in Croke Park on average 7 to 8 games per year. Kildare, on the other hand side, if they're in the same division as Dublin, they could get a game at Croke Park there and then, away to Dublin. Does not often happen. So, let's discount that. So in terms of the championship itself, Kildare will get a Leinster semi-final and more often than not a Leinster final in Croke Park. They'll probably then get a preliminary round game in Croke Park. And if they progress beyond that, they'll get a quarter-final game in Croke Park, possibly even a semi-final. You're talking 3 to 4 games in Croke Park. Dublin get 7 to 8 games in Croke Park. It's not a huge difference. It's not like Dublin are playing 15 to 16 games per season in Croke Park and Kildare are playing 1 or 2. Kildare are still playing in Croke Park, and there's still an element of familiarity there that they should have as well. And the thing that frustrates me ever so slightly with Kildare is that, and obviously we'll get into some tweets and we'll get into some reaction and everything else from what people have been discussing about this. Kildare and Meath in particular, those two counties, ex-managers, players, obviously with John Cannellan, former Westmeath footballer, who, put together a really good article and a really good sort of presentation of the issues. And to be fair, I think he was more than spot on in everything that he said. But I think a lot of the time there's, especially with Meath and Kildare, there's always this, when they lose to Dublin, the whole Leinster Championship thing, the whole Dublin dominance debate, they're always very quick to criticise Dublin. They're always quick to label, Dublin as, they're too powerful, they've too many resources, they've too many this and that. And look, to a certain degree, it is true. If these games are not played in Croke Park, if semi-finals were not played in Croke Park week in, week out, maybe these sides would have a chance. But let's talk about facts here. Croke Park, in the last 15 to 20 years, the attendance on Sunday at Croke Park for those semi-finals was 38,000. 38,000. If Meath were playing in a Leinster semi-final, maybe they would have brought more supporters. So you could have been talking about possibly 40,000, give or take. Now, that attendance right there was one of the lowest attendances of a provincial semi-final in Croke Park in, I think, about almost 40 to 50 years. But it's still more attendance than any other ground in Leinster. Portlaoise, 28,000. Nolan Park, 27,000. Parnell Park, 8,500. So, what do we want to do here? We can't. So we take Dublin out of Croke Park. What's then happening is you're getting lower attendances in Tullamore. You're getting lower attendances in Portlaoise. You're getting lower attendances in Park Talchin if you want to play the game there. That ground is 11,000. Newbridge, 11,000. And obviously Newbridge is being redesigned at the moment. Maybe they'll be able to hold more. But people forget as well that Kildare GEA do get a portion of revenue for playing in Croke Park, and they probably get more portion of revenue for playing in Croke Park than they would get for playing in, another provincial ground such as Tullamore, for example, because of the fact that there's more fans, there's more crowd, there's more people that will be at these games, in my opinion. Now, I know you could say, well, you could have both provincial semi-finals in separate grounds, and therefore, if you accumulate the ticket sales from both grounds, it would be more than what it was in Croke Park for a double header, give or take, depending on where those games are played. So I think the whole element of taking Dublin out of Croke Park, especially with the attendance debate, for me doesn't hold up. You know, it doesn't hold up. And like, I do think there's an air of hypocrisy here. Like, we're, you know, Kildare, Meath consistently coming out blaming Dublin, when at the same time they are getting a portion of the revenue for playing in Croke Park. They get a portion of the revenue for playing Croke Park in league games when they play Dublin. And it's the same again in quarterfinals, semi-finals of All-Ireland or preliminary rounds. It's the same again. And it'll probably be the same again for Meath when they play in Croke Park in Tailteann Cup semi-final. And like, the thing that frustrates me as well is that, like, when you look at Kildare, when you look at Meath, like, these counties at senior level have not been ran right for the last 20 years. You know, Kildare are quick to say, oh, we lost the Leinster Championship because of Dublin's dominance and everything else. And, oh, like, you know, if Dublin didn't have as much money, we would have won that game. Maybe if you had it prepared adequately throughout the entirety of the year. Maybe if the mental attitude was right earlier in the year. Like, let's not forget, Kildare early in the year got battered by Cork, got battered by Derry. Like, they didn't turn up until, you know, towards the end of the league. They were in a relegation battle in Division 2. Like, how can you go from that to winning a provincial final? It wouldn't happen in any other province. Why should it happen in Leinster? And the funny thing is, like, Kildare, like, as we were saying, always, you know, blaming Dublin and everything else. 2010, what happened that year? Kildare were beaten by Louth in a Leinster quarter final. That was a year Kildare should have won the Leinster Championship. They were the best team in Leinster that year. They got to an All-Ireland semi-final. You know, like, and there's been plenty of times down the years where Kildare have been better than Dublin, and they've played better than Dublin, but they haven't won. You know, and I think there's a constant deflection away from what can we actually do to win. You know, why are we producing so much at underage level? Why did we win an All-Ireland at under 20 level in 2018, but yet we're not succeeding at senior level? You know, what's going on with Meath? Why did they win an All-Ireland at minor level? But at under 20 level, it's non-existent. You know, these counties should look more at themselves. Try and get your house in order. Look at Monaghan, look at Clare, look at Louth. Look at what these counties are doing. Look at what they're achieving. Do you know what I mean? Look at what they're doing with limited resources. You don't see them complaining. And I know the argument would be, oh, well, Monaghan, you know, Monaghan don't have to play in Leinster. Clare don't have to play in Leinster. Look at what they're doing in the league. You know, Clare staying in Division 2 consistently. I know they got relegated this year, but staying in Division 2 consistently, competing with Kildare, competing with Meath. Look at Monaghan, a county with a fraction of the resources of Kildare. Look at what they are doing, you know, staying in Division 1 consistently, you know, competing for Ulster titles in a more difficult province where teams are better in Ulster right now than Dublin, you know? So, like, I just think, and again, people will say, oh, well, you know, they don't play in Leinster and everything else. Look at what they're doing in the league and the All-Ireland series. I think from a Kildare perspective and from a Meath perspective, they should focus more getting into Division 1, solidifying Division 1. When's the last time either one of these two counties avoided relegation in Division 1? And they complain that Dublin play all their league games in Croke Park and everything else. But where else are we supposed to play them? Parnell Park, 8,500. Like, what, build a new stadium? We build a new stadium, then people will probably be giving out about that as well. Oh, look at Dublin, all the resources. Now they build a new stadium for themselves. You know, what do we want here? You know, and teams complain sometimes that they don't get enough games in Croke Park, and then they get them, and then they complain. Like, there's a lot of hypocrisy involved. And yeah,
in my experience, he's 100% right. I think the familiarity that Dublin have with Croke Park, I think there's a bias there that favours Dublin that people don't, or some of the officials or some of the mentors around Croke Park don't even realise. You know, like, we've had many's the battle up there with them, and when Dublin are there, it's per se their home ground. They know the people around the place, times, dressing rooms,
the stuff on the big screen, the music that's played.
The stuff on the big screen, images that's shown, the music that's played that comes in.
The hell being open.
You know, you take these in isolation. Players on the pitch before the game, some are allowed, you know, other teams are not. Glenn referenced this on the sideline of experience myself. You're meant to have a certain amount of people on the sideline. Some teams can have more than others, nothing said. All that kind of, now it's small in isolation stuff. But when you add it all up, there's definitely something there that's a favourite to Dublin. And this has nothing to do with the Dublin players or anything like that. But it's because they're there so often, because they've been so successful. They know the names of all the people on the doors. They can go where they want. Other teams can't. We can't do this. We can't do that. We can't do the other. So they're all small things, but it does add up to something that can be a frustration. It does add up to something that might be that one attack or that one play or that one bit of confidence or whatever that can impact the game. And that's where I think it all came into that Daniel Flynn incident on the sideline for Glenn, that wasn't a line ball but was given or whatever. So you can sometimes align everything towards something like that might cause. But certainly for me, because Dublin are there so often, they get the run of the place.
Like James Horan, obviously hugely successful manager, one of the most successful for Mayo in terms of Connacht titles, in terms of obviously winning the league, and in terms of getting Mayo to All Ireland finals. He knows absolutely everything about playing Dublin. He knows absolutely everything about competing with Dublin. And I think, to be fair, Mayo do have a valid argument, because Mayo, in fairness, if it hasn't been for the amount of resources that's been pumped into Dublin in the last 20, 30 years, Mayo would probably have an All-Ireland. They probably would have gotten over the line, you'd imagine, in one of those years. So I think Mayo have a little bit of a different argument to Kildare, because, look, Mayo have been competing with Dublin at the highest level. Kildare haven't, So I think there is an element of sort of, I can understand it from Mayo's point of view. But what I would say is this whole thing of Dublin know the tea ladies, they can knock on certain doors, they know the people around the place. You can have more officials on the sideline than other teams, which I just don't believe. And all this sort of talk and everything else, that Dublin know more than everything else. Like they don't have to travel as far and everything else. I just don't think that has as much an impact in the game as in my opinion. It just doesn't. I don't think that has much of an impact. Like, at the end of the day, if you are playing for your county in Croke Park and you're affected by the music on the big screen, you're affected by, the dressing room, you're affected by this, you're affected by that, you probably shouldn't be playing. You should probably be sat in my seat and be a fan. You know what I mean? I think that's the argument of it. If you're a manager of a county like Mayo, a county of Kerry, of Donegal, of one of these big counties, Tyrone, and you're getting affected by things on the big screen, maybe you shouldn't be manager, and maybe that's why James Horan isn't the manager of Mayo anymore. You know what I mean? I just don't think that's enough validity to warrant, all this talk of Dublin having an advantage. Dublin having an advantage, fair enough, because they play in Croke Park more than anyone else, and they're familiar with the pitch, and they're a team that plays there very often. But it's not enough of an excuse to warrant why, is that the reason why Mayo haven't got over the line in All Irelands? Is that the reason why they scored 2 own goals in 2016? Is that the reason why they couldn't, I suppose, Cillian O'Connor missed those chances in 2016 and 2017? And obviously, look, James Horan's referring more to Kildare's situation, but in terms of All Ireland finals, they're going to be in Croke Park. It's an even amount of tickets to go to Dublin fans and Mayo fans. So what's the, you know what I mean? All Ireland semi-finals need to be played in Croke Park because of the attendance. Attendance in All Ireland semi-finals would usually be 50, 60,000. Where else are we supposed to play them? What else are we supposed to do here? What's the problem? And personally, I think it's a GAA issue, and it's the fact that there isn't, maybe you could play an All Ireland semi-final in Páirc Uí Chaoimh. I think that wouldn't be. I wouldn't be against that as a Dublin fan. Maybe with the quarterfinals, because it is lower attendances there, maybe you could move them around and put them in different grounds around the country. But I think this whole talk of, Croke Park being a significant advantage, it is. But what else are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do here? We can't redevelop Parnell Park because it's in a housing estate, and you'd have to knock down houses to make the ground bigger. So, what happens? We build a new stadium. People are going to give out then. Look at Dublin. They get their own state-of-the-art stadium, and they already have Croke Park. They already have Parnell Park. And the thing is with Mayo have played in Croke Park more than anyone else as well. Quarterfinals, league finals. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's very frustrating, this whole talk. I think there is a truth in the argument that there is an unfair advantage for Dublin. But I think at the same time, You know, Croke Park is our national stadium. It's in the capital. It makes sense. Take Dublin out of Croke Park for league games. Fair enough. Put them in Parnell Park. Parnell Park isn't big enough. So what do we? You know, okay, then. I'll tell you what. Let's just give every other county a home game versus Dublin. I honestly think a lot of Dublin fans wouldn't care at this point. And to be fair, they'd actually probably relish traveling and going to other grounds and, you know, going to other places. I don't know, man. Look, I know a lot of people are probably going to disagree in the comments down below. And look, that's completely fair. But at the same time, I see this more of as a GAA issue rather than a Dublin issue. And I think the whole, because what it feels like a lot of the time with James Horn, with other fans, with Glenn Ryan, is that, you know, it's almost a discredit of Dublin's achievements. And I don't think they intend for it to be that way. But, you know, Dublin had a golden era, in my opinion, in the decade of the 2010s. And I don't think we'll ever see an era like that again. You know, we've only won one All-Ireland in this decade, and that's 2020. And in my opinion, we're not going to win it this year. We might win it next year. You know, we might get an act together, you know, or act together with new management in place. But I don't think we're going to win it this year, you know. And you look back through the 2000s, no All-Irelands. No, 1990s, one All-Ireland. People will say that the funding and everything else only started in the late 90s, early 2000s. Okay, that is true. That is true. But Dublin don't have a monopoly over other teams anymore. Louth could beat Dublin in a couple of weeks' time. And how funny would it be? I don't want it to happen. How funny would, you know, Kildare and Meath complaining loads about Leinster and everything else. And I'm using Meath because of the, you know, Andy McEntee obviously going on the Sunday game a couple of years ago. And some of the talk from their own supporters. In fairness to Meath, I think most Meath fans this year have taken accountability, have taken responsibility, and there's been no blame towards Dublin this year, in fairness. And even Colm O'Rourke said when they got beat by Offaly, they are where they deserve to be, in fairness. But I'm just using Meath as an example because in previous years, you know, there's been a lot of talk from them as well. How crazy would it be if Louth go and beat Dublin? It's possible. It's possible, you know? You know, and Kildare will complain they haven't won a Leinster title since 2000. 2010, Dublin weren't even in a Leinster final, you know, and I don't know, but I've probably gone on a bit here, but this is just generally my opinion. And you'll see on screen here, this was the document that was released a couple of years, well, a good while ago, obviously, and obviously it was circulating over social media a good couple of years ago in regarding to the funding that each county gets. You know, in terms of resources, money they can put towards coaching, training, facilities, absolutely everything. And we see there, look, Dublin with 19 million in funding. Obviously, you know, it's probably increased since then, you'd imagine, or I'm not entirely sure how it works quite now. I'm not an accountant, so I don't know all the facts and figures, but you'll see there, Dublin with 19 million in funding. Look, it is a disgrace. You know, it is not fair that Dublin get that amount compared to the other counties on this list. You know, and I think it's something that I don't know if the GA have addressed it. It is a complicated issue because of the fact that Dublin have so many clubs in the country and they have a big population, and that funding is allocated because of, you know, the resources is almost needed because of the amount of clubs, and clubs are growing, you know, and everything else. And I think that's the reason why the funding has been put in place, because of the fact that, you know, to support the amount of clubs that are in Dublin. But I do think at the same time, it probably is self-sufficient now. And I do think, you know, the funding should be more allocated throughout the entirety of the country. But why I've brought this document up is because if we have a look there at this document, Dublin are in first. Okay, Cork in second, Antrim, Derry. And then look at it, Meath and Kildare. Meath with, you know, 1.5 million of funding allocated to them, and Kildare with 1.4 million allocated to them. If we go further down the list, let's go all the way down towards the bottom of the list. Look at Mayo there with 887,000. Donegal, 869,000. Monaghan, Tyrone, Armagh getting some of the least amount of funding, you know, allocated to them over the last 20 years. You know what I mean? And look at what those counties have achieved. You know, Tyrone have won an All-Ireland in 2021, won an All-Ireland in 2008. Armagh, you know, could possibly win an Ulster title next weekend. Monaghan, look at what they've done. You know what I mean? So, like, Kildare complain loads, and there's always this complaint about Dublin having so much of a monopoly in terms of resources. But Kildare and Meath have more resources than plenty of other counties, more resources than Galway, you know? more resources than Limerick. Look at what they're doing in hurling. I know they're backed by JP McManus, but look at what they're doing. You look at it there, and you look at Monaghan, you look at Roscommon as well. Counties that are maximising the resources that they have. They have the right structures in place. They're well run. They've got great county boards in place. They promote the games in schools. They do everything that's possible to give themselves the best chance possible. Look at Louth. Look at what Louth have done in the space of 4 years. A couple of years ago, they were in Division 4. They're probably no different to the likes of Carlow, the likes of Wicklow, you know, in terms of the positions that they're in right now. And look at what they have done in the space of a couple of years. They've surpassed Kildare and Meath. They've surpassed them. They beat them this year in the league. They could beat Dublin in a Leinster final. It's not inconceivable. You know, and Louth, let's be honest, should have won that Leinster final in 2010. You know, look at what they're doing. Look what happens when you get a good manager in place, when you get your right structures in place. Look at what is possible. And I'm not saying that if Kildare get everything and all their structures right and everything works well, that they'll go and win a Leinster title. But it's possible. Yeah, Kildare have to hop on Dublin at underage level. They 100% do. And if they get their act together, they get players into the senior team, and you know they get players to commit. They have more than a chance of winning a Leinster title. Davy Burke is probably one of the top managers in the GAA at the moment, but he's managing Roscommon and he's not managing Kildare. Do you know what I mean? Why is that? Why has that happened? Would Kildare be struggling near the bottom of Division 2 if Davy Burke was in charge? I don't think so. I think they would have been. They mightn't have got out of Division 2 because it was a tough division, but they would have been close. They would have been close. And to be honest with you, they would have beaten Dublin on Sunday. They would have. So there we go. So we'll run through, obviously, some tweets in regards to, I suppose, the whole topic and the whole discussion around this topic. Ewan McKenna said FFF and F off. I suppose he had to put a lot of curses in there just to, I suppose, sort of increase his point or his view. F off if you say money doesn't matter. This was another game that encapsulated why money matters. Same stuff people have been ignoring for years. Fitness in last quarter, bench and venue have been key to Dublin wins for years, and here all money. Fair, you know. Okay, it's all money that Kildare didn't close out the game. Was it money that Dublin narrowly got over the line in a lot of those All-Ireland finals? You know, Dublin were beating Kildare by 20-25 points the last couple of seasons. And what's funny with Kildare fans is there's like Kildare fans only earlier in the year were giving out about their own county. They were saying, you know, the preparation isn't right. We're not preparing ourselves. We're in decline. You know, we're not. Why are we not producing at senior level? Why are we producing at underage level and not at senior level? And there's so much blame that gets shifted towards Dublin when maybe take some responsibility. You know, maybe look at yourselves. Like why? Like as I said before, look at Louth. Look at these other counties who are showing what is possible with less resources. And look, I completely understand if you're a Kildare fan, you're frustrated. You're a Meath fan, you're frustrated over, you know, Dublin's monopoly in Leinster. And look, it is unfair, as I said, like the fact we always play in Croke Park. But what else can we do? Like in the last 10, 15 years, you look at the margin Dublin have beaten teams. Dublin have been, you know, there's probably only been 3-4 games I can think of where the margin in the 13-year spell has been less than 3 or 4 points. A lot of the time it's 10, 15, 20 points. So if those games are being played in Tullamore, those games are being played in Portlaoise, those games are being played in Aughrim, those games are being played in RD, wherever you want to have these games, Dublin would have still won those games. It might have been ever so slightly closer, might have been 5 or 6 points in the difference, but Dublin still would have won those games. And why would they still have won those games? Because Kildare and Meath haven't been good enough. And for the last 20 years, those two counties have massively underachieved at senior level. You know, how many times have those counties gotten to quarterfinals in the last 10 years? How many times have they got beyond quarterfinals? You know? I think it's worth considering. Monaghan getting to All-Ireland semi-finals. You know, winning provincial titles. Clare getting to an All-Ireland quarter-final, beating Roscommon. Clare beat Meath in the championship last year. I think it's worth considering. I think it's worth looking at. And the question would be, what is the solution? I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. take Dublin out of Croke Park, fair enough. But will it, it will probably make a difference now because Dublin have regressed and I think Kildare are on the up. But I think Kildare should beat Dublin and Croke Park anyway. And this is just to call out some of the hypocrisy from some of the Kildare supporters. And as we said, Ewan McKenna there, who said all money, is the reason why Dublin won the game, and all the advantages and all this talk, we've been ignoring it for years, and fitness in the last quarter made a huge difference. This was a tweet from the same man a couple of months ago, February 26, 2023. Had the misfortune of running into chunks of this Kildare panel in recent years. Gym monkeys, single-digit IQ, huge talent for sure, but unlikable idiots who think playing county and being humiliated is an achievement worthy of arrogance. Just morons. I'm embarrassed beyond results. So, in the last tweet, it was fitness in the last quarter. In this one, it's gym monkeys. So, if I put the pieces of the puzzle together, let me think about that one. So, could it be that Kildare did not get beyond Dublin in the final 10-15 minutes because of fitness in the last quarter, but you said they were gym monkeys? So, you know what I mean? And maybe just maybe Kildare have not adequately prepared and have not had the mental fortitude this year at times in the league. As you said, huge talent. And look, I think that's something we both agree on. But has the preparation been right throughout the year in Division 2? Was the confidence there to see the game out against Dublin? Maybe if they had to come through Cork earlier in the season, maybe if players had been fitter, maybe if they had tried a bit more things out. I don't know. I just single-digit IQ, and to be fair, that tweet right there, I do not disagree with. Like, I think that is abusive of the highest order. Like, I think, it's bizarre, absolutely bizarre, and like we see Leitrim GEA release statements on abuse of players and everything else. This is basically what that is for Kildare. And this was obviously, I remember seeing this tweet a few months ago, and I never mentioned it, I never referenced it because I just thought it was a very vile tweet to label towards an amateur team. But the fact that this has obviously surfaced up over the last few days, and I obviously had a few back and forths with Ewan McKenna. I don't know him personally. I'm sure he's, a sound man or whatever. Like, I've nothing against him, but I just think, like what is it then? What is it? Is it Dublin's dominance is the reason why Kildare haven't been successful? Or is it because most of the players haven't been bothered, up until this game? Do you know what I mean? What is it? Because it can't be both. So I'll just run through some other tweets very quickly before we finish things up. So as you see here, Philly McMahon, I suppose, enjoying all the enjoying the talk about obviously Dublin playing music and everything else. And like, look, music gets played for both sides. Like, even when Mayo win, they did play their song. When Kildare, I don't know, but there we go. I suppose a bit of humor, a bit of a joke, a bit of a laugh, and look, we have to laugh about this situation. To be fair, Diarmuid Connolly says comedy gold. He's definitely getting involved as well. In fairness to him, and look, I think if you ask Diarmuid Connolly and Philly McMahon, I think they would admit that Dublin do have an unfair advantage. But I just think some of the arguments put forward have just been a little bit lazy, like blaming the tea ladies, the big screen. They know people around the place and everything else. And it says here some distasteful comments about Dublin getting home comforts, begrudgers. They don't get Hill 16N for warm-up. They don't get their own dressing room. They don't get Hill 16 open at cheaper prices when other counties don't. Not true. They don't get to sleep at home night before games. Okay, so they don't get Hill 16N for warm-up. Obviously, this is all tongue-in-cheek sarcasm. Obviously, Dublin do get all of these things. If you haven't noticed already, training in front of Hill 16, like I genuinely believe, if we had a situation like 2006 again, if Kildare were training in front of the Hill, Dublin would just walk the other way. That around 2006, there was a stigma around Dublin. We believed our hype. We believed we were better than everyone else. There was an arrogance about Dublin, and that was what cost us winning an All-Ireland in that decade. This right here, like, I just don't think it matters. Like, if you remember, and it's probably something that doesn't get mentioned, Dublin used to always attack the Hill in the second half. Again, because it was an era of, we have to attack the hill in the second half. We have to use the advantage of the crowd. Nowadays, Dublin attack the hill in the first half, and we always attack the other end in the second half, because it was something that started under Jim Gavin. Because at the end of the day, like, Dublin are trying to move away from that, and they're trying to move away from the focus of the crowd, because ultimately it doesn't have that much of an impact in the game, in my opinion. It might have a slight impact, but it doesn't have a huge impact. Enda says they don't get their own dressing room. I've been in both dressing rooms in Croke Park. I've seen both dressing rooms. There's not a huge amount of difference between the two. One of them is bigger than the other. One of them might have a shower and a toilet and a different crack like that. But move the dressing rooms around then. Like, it doesn't make that much of an impact. I don't think it does, personally. Do you know what I mean? Enda says they don't get Hill 16 open at cheaper prices when other counties don't. I mean, that's just not true. Like, it was the same price for the Hill for Kildare fans during the week, €20 standing ticket. It's the same price. It's just not true. They don't get to sleep at home night before games. Fair enough, yeah, fair enough. They do, and maybe that is a slight advantage. Maybe that they don't have to get up earlier and do the travelling and everything else. But in All Ireland finals, when Mayo have been there, when Tyrone have been there, and Galway and Kerry were there recently, I'm sure there was hotels booked the night before those games. I'm fairly certain there was. So again, they got a night at home before the game. A night in a nice hotel. You know what I mean? So, and Kildare don't have to travel that far. And Dublin's a big county. It's probably nearly closer for some Kildare players to get to Croke Park than it is for some Dublin players who are far on the south side, or in and around the same distance. So there we go. But yeah, Smaller Fish GEA says the problem is not the venue for today's match. It's a Leinster semi-final. Even though you could argue with the shy crowd, it doesn't need to be there. It is that Dublin are allowed to treat the National Stadium as their home venue. Every home game played there since 2011. There was also a tweet here from James Horan, obviously, just re-mentioning what he said. Not to mention, usually about 80-90% of the support, all home league games and all Ireland series home games there. Anyone arguing against the unfair advantage cannot be taken seriously. And as I said, the home advantage is there, and it is unfair. But as I said before, it's one of those scenarios where, number one, what's the solution? Okay, take Dublin out of Croke Park, put them into other grounds around the country. Will it make that big of a difference around Leinster? Maybe right now it will, because Dublin are, have clearly regressed in the last couple of years, and I think Kildare have the capabilities of possibly winning Leinster in the next couple of years. But I think the issue there is, like, again, with attendances, and with grounds, unfortunately, it's probably the GAA's fault that there isn't really too many other grounds around Leinster that we can go in. You know what I mean? And for a provincial final, like, where do you hold a provincial final? Tullamore, Portlaoise, fair enough, but like, if Kildare were playing loud in a Leinster final, they'd want it in Croke Park, because those fans would want to go to that game, because it would be hugely historic, obviously, with the fact that Dublin aren't in it. But I think the unfair advantages are there, but is it as crucial to change the swing of a game? I'm not entirely sure that it is. And when Dublin have played in Croke Park in All Ireland semi-finals and All Ireland finals against the likes of Mayo, Tyrone and Kerry, those fans have brought the support and brought the noise. And you could argue, in my opinion, I think, and I don't think I'm wrong in saying this, a lot of the time when Dublin have played Mayo, there's probably been more Mayo fans than Dublin fans. And Mayo fans are brilliant, brilliant supporters. They really get behind their county. And if we're talking about the referees, maybe making certain calls because of the crowd, with the Mayo fans being so vocal, could we argue then he's maybe given Mayo certain decisions? I don't believe that. But on the basis of what people are saying, maybe that's something we need to talk about, Barry O'Carroll says James telling us that Mayo failing to get over the line consistently had nothing to do with their performances on the big stage, was due to the screen in Croke Park and the music played when teams come out from half-time. Will never have their big day with that mentality. In fairness, Smaller Fish GA did reply, and he said, show me where He said it had nothing to do with their performance. Come on, Barry. I suppose, yeah, James Horan didn't say specifically that we didn't win the All-Irelands because of those reasons, but he has mentioned those reasons. And he obviously does feel to a certain extent that those reasons have mattered for certain teams losing to Dublin down the years. And like, he's obviously talking about his own experience. He obviously does feel that it has been a disadvantage. He hasn't openly said it, but I think he's implied that maybe it has had something to do with the fact that Mayo haven't got over the line. I might be wrong, and look, I'm completely open for correction on that, but that's just my opinion. Eamon McGee says, hard to have sympathy for counties given out about the obvious advantage Dublin have in Croke Park. Donegal called it out for the 2019 Super 8, and it was labelled a divisive motion and got very little support. Anthony Moyle says, for anyone who doesn't think Croke Park is treated as Dublin's home venue, then how come they always seem to warm up in front of Hill 16? Luck of the draw, perhaps. And it is a fair take, and you know, it's probably just one of those things that's always been sort of the case, because Hill 16's always been there. You know, Hill 16 was there, you know, back in the 1970s and 1980s. You know, it's just been tradition, really. You know what I mean? But could you argue that needs to be changed? You know, maybe the Hill needs to not be a Dublin stand anymore. And look, maybe changes need to be made there. It's an interesting point. But anyway, I've definitely gone on longer than expected for this debate and a bit of a rant. And look, you know, I understand a lot of people will probably disagree with this, and you know, that's fair enough. If I wasn't a Dublin fan and I was Kildare and, you know, a Meath fan, maybe I would completely agree with them. You know, and it's, you know, you can only speak off what you know and what you've seen and what you're familiar with, and obviously as a Dublin fan, look, I think on this channel I'm very good at remaining impartial, remaining unbiased, and calling it how it is. But, you know, if I wasn't a Dublin fan, would I have a different opinion on this? Maybe. But I personally do believe that, look, it is an advantage for Dublin, and there are solutions there where you take Dublin out of Croke Park and put them on other grounds. Will it make as much of an impact as we think? Possibly not. If anything, it could raise Dublin standards because they'll want to show everyone that the whole Croke Park thing does not matter. And fair enough, if that game on Sunday was played in Tullamore, Kildare might have won the game. They might have just won the game. But if you look at Dublin Kildare on average for the last 10, 13 years, Dublin have beaten them 15, 20, 10, you know, 10 points. Few games here and there where it's been a little bit less. But that's generally been the scoreline. Like, and it's been the same with Meath as well. Been the same with Meath. And you could argue, like, fair enough, those counties aren't used to playing in Croke Park as much as Dublin. But when we played Meath earlier in the year in the league, we still wiped the floor with them. I know Kildare beat us in the league last year at home. But generally speaking, when we've played these sides, even outside Croke Park, we still beat them anyway. And I still think the margin's been so big that the only thing that would have happened in the last 10, 13 years is the margins would have been smaller. It would have been better games. It would have been more entertainment and better viewing. And I don't think Dublin fans would have been against that. But I think this whole notion that it's all money, that we haven't won a Leinster title because of Dublin's era of dominance in Croke Park, is just completely it's just completely not true. Completely not true, in my opinion. But there we go. There we go. Like, curious to know people's opinions, curious to know people's thoughts. Let me know what you think about this topic. And as I said, look, feel free to disagree in the comments down below. And look, hopefully I've remained somewhat unbiased and somewhat impartial to discuss this topic. I can understand both points of view, but I think, in my opinion, I think the likes of Kildare and Meath and these other counties, you know, should try and get their house in order first before they can hugely criticise this whole Dublin discussion. Because, like, as I said before, in the last 10, 13 years, if these games are played in neutral venues, Dublin still would have won anyway. That is the reality. Might have been a smaller margin. Dublin still would have won anyway, you know? But there we go. There we go. And in terms of provincial finals, where do you hold them? Because although the attendance has been really poor and is consistently declining, it's still more than any other ground in the province. And that's the issue. That's the problem. You know, if you have a Leinster final in Portlaoise, you know, what You know, so there we go. But yeah, let me know your thoughts, your opinions in the comments down below. Like, subscribe. See you all.